Hey everyone, in this video I will do a review of the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo that was released. The full Part 1 of the remake is slated to come out on April 10th, and Square allowed the public a taste of how the game will function through the demo. First, a quick history of Final Fantasy VII for me. As some of you know, although I'm a big Kingdom Hearts fan, I'm also a big Final Fantasy fan. I played Final Fantasy VII many years ago and have played through it a good 3 times. Although I prefer playing FF8 and 9, I still enjoyed 7. For me, I felt Final Fantasy was in its prime on PS1. So going into the remake, it's awesome to see such an old game fully remade to be modernized more. If you never played FF7, the battle system in that game is not quite turn-based like older Final Fantasy games. Ever since FF4, Square kept bringing back the ATB system, which stands for Active Time Battle. It's a system that allows your characters to act only when their time bar is filled, unlike the NES Final Fantasies or other RPGs where they're fully turn-based. Fights being based on ATB tend to be more intense as you have less time to plan out actions even if you set menuing to wait mode. With that being said, Square wanted to spice it up a bit for the remake and turn it into more of an action RPG than the traditional ATB system. However, before I start the review itself, I should state that I see many people relating FF7's remake to trying to be like Kingdom Hearts, and thus complaining that it doesn't play like the Kingdom Hearts series. I can tell you now that the intention is that it's not supposed to play like Kingdom Hearts. Square designed this remake to still have heavy RPG elements with some real-time action as well. I'll elaborate later, but for now, you shouldn't be going into this game thinking it's another Kingdom Hearts. Also, there is massive confusion around how many parts this game will be and where the cutoffs will be versus the original game. Final Fantasy VII Original was 3 discs on PS1. Discs 1 and 2 were pretty long, a good 10 to 15 hours each, and Disc 3 was mostly just the final dungeon with the final boss. So don't assume it'll be 3 parts like the original or play out like each disc. Part 1 of the remake is only stated to be a playthrough of Disc 1's Midgar. In the original game, this was about 5 to 7 hours of gameplay at the beginning. Now, you're probably wondering, how is that worth a full game price for just 5 to 7 hours of the original? Well, they've stated multiple times now that Midgar is going to be fully realized. This also isn't just an exact remake. They promise that on top of a fully explorable Midgar, there will be a giant slew of extra content added that never existed in the original game. They also said that the gameplay itself will be full game's worth. Now, here is where I weigh in my opinion. For me, Final Fantasy VII didn't start taking off until you get out of Midgar. I found Midgar to be mostly boring, and also mostly just an intro location. Having a whole game based in where I didn't enjoy FF7 Original as much sounds like it might be an issue. However, with all the extra promised content, it may very well still be worth every penny. A common complaint I see against this business model is people saying that you're not getting the full experience of the original without having to pay over $100. To that, I say this is no different than normal sequels of games. The original was of course one game, but when judging prices of games, it's the content that matters, more than if you're getting a whole story. Whether or not each part will be worth its money, that remains to be seen, but the demo is a good indication of the level of depth added, which I'll get to shortly. Anyway, let's start the actual review of the demo. The demo lets you play through all the way to the game's first boss and a little afterwards, which plays out mostly the same as original FF7. Let's get the easy praise out of the way. Graphically, there is no disappointment here, and I doubt there will be when the game is released. Square always tends to be at the top of their game when it comes to graphics, and for such a high-profile remake, I don't see them underperforming. Final Fantasy VII Original was awesome graphics for its time, and even though it hasn't aged as well as the other PS1 Final Fantasy games graphically, it's still a testament to how Square handles graphics throughout the console generations. But as of right now, the game looks beautiful. Unfortunately, Midgar is a generally pretty dark-themed part of the game, but even so, the level of detail in each area is insane, keeping in mind all the extra rooms and content they are adding to this to make up for Part 1 being all Midgar. Anyway, moving on, the music of course is completely remade as well, but still true to the original. From everything I've heard so far, it's amazing, and I can't wait to hear all the music in the entire remake once it's fully finished. I have a lot of faith the soundtrack won't disappoint. Now let's discuss the combat, as that is what many are questioning when it comes to the remake. Now that this game is moving away from the traditional ATB system a bit, things have to be changed quite a lot to make it work. This game doesn't want full action RPG combat and also wants to retain a lot of its standard RPG elements. The demo has a lot of mechanics to teach you in a short amount of time, but they did it pretty well by having all fights you encounter teach you a new mechanic instead of something like 3 in one fight. You also get a fair amount of fights in the demo to try to keep practicing these mechanics. As for what's changed, let's talk a bit about that. Now, instead of just choosing attack, you have to either press or hold square to attack. Holding it does an AoE finisher attack, while pressing it does a single target finisher. Instead of ATB being used for normal attacks, now the bar fills up to allow you to use other actions such as special moves, items, and magic. This does tend to limit you a bit more than the original since it means you don't have full access to all your actions all the time, but the way they set it up seems pretty solid and likely more balanced. Instead of the Final Fantasy XV catastrophe of being able to freely item your way out of any challenging scenario, now you are limited to heal. You must make decisions where if you're low on HP, perhaps you spend a bar to heal instead, or maybe you use it for an ability move that staggers the enemy. The ATB gauge is filled various different ways, such as regular physical attacks, your unique moves, blocking, etc. Combat revolves around getting the ATB gauge to fill as fast as possible so you have more options sooner. If you're not playing classic mode, you can still slow down combat to give you time to select actions in a fight by pressing X. This gives you enough time to select an action without getting attacked during it too fast. Although, a great addition to help out with this is shortcuts. If you're a Kingdom Hearts player, this should be second nature by now, as holding L1 brings up your shortcut menu. It appears you can shortcut almost any action here, even limits. The more observant players probably realized Cloud has fire and decided to fill that empty shortcut with fire. Yet another interesting mechanic is guard and evade. In the original, you could only do defend, which wastes a turn but buffs your defense. This time, you can guard whenever you want. It reduces damage from attacks. There's also evade, which is done by pressing circle. This is where I see a lot of Kingdom Hearts players getting confused and frustrated. Evade in Kingdom Hearts is dodge roll, which gives you iframes to dodge enemy attacks. The confusion lies around what the intention was for that move in this game, as it clearly does not seem to have much for iframes. What I believe the move was designed for in this game was to dodge AoE attacks quickly that can't be guarded. It's not meant to be spammed to dodge through attacks taking no damage. It's best not to think of this game's combat like Kingdom Hearts when learning how to use evade. For example, a good use of it is when the boss uses EM field, you can easily quickly cancel your combo with evade and move away with it as well. It gives you quick distance from AoE attacks. Yet another new mechanic is unique abilities that each character has, triggered by the triangle button. Cloud's is Punisher mode. This mode buffs his physical combo greatly, but makes him move slower and also not able to guard from a distance. Although up-close physical attacks that are guarded in this move cause a strong counterattack. Many think this mode is broken. Based on the demo, I can see why you'd think that, but consider that freely using it on the boss is a good example of why it's double-edged. You leave yourself wide open going for Punisher combos and move much slower. I'd wager that the game is likely balanced around his Punisher mode, and while it seems great for most regular fights, it probably won't auto-win you boss fights or tougher regular enemies. Next, the demo teaches you how to switch characters as Barret joins in the fights. A fear for many is that it would do something like what Final Fantasy XIII did and make you control only one character while the other two are automated AI for the entire fight, yet original FF7 lets you control up to 3 characters in a fight. It appears they're going to let you switch freely, as simply pressing left or right on the D-pad quickly swaps to another party member. It's awesome how fluid it is, and the very first fight in the game where Barret is playable has enemies that he specializes in wiping out, followed by enemies Cloud does after, so you are meant to switch during the fight back and forth to make it easier. Barret also has access to his own shortcuts, and you can even still set them like Cloud can. However, I made a silly mistake my first playthrough of the demo. Barret brings Thunder and Cure into the group, and for some reason unknown to me, you can set Cloud to have Barret's Thunder and Cure on Cloud's shortcuts. Unfortunately though, it won't work. So I was fairly confused that the game lets you do this, yet it doesn't work. Perhaps it works differently in the full game, but be careful when setting shortcuts to only put on what your character has equipped. The last large feature the demo introduces is the stagger bar for enemies. If you've played Final Fantasy XIII, this will be easy for you to understand. This bar did not exist in the original, but having it here adds much more depth to harder, HP sponge type enemies. Essentially, if you deal large damage or use certain attacks or hit enemies' weaknesses, it will put the bar into pressured status. While in pressured status, if you unload even more magic, abilities, or hit weaknesses, the bar will skyrocket and fill faster. When the bar is filled, the enemy is in stagger status. When an enemy is staggered, they are completely defenseless and take more damage. If you use unique abilities, such as Cloud's Punisher mode, it builds up your ATB gauge much faster, allowing you to launch abilities and magic even faster. Now that I mentioned most mechanics the demo tries to teach you, we have the game's first boss. In the original, it was a very simplistic and easy boss. It had a move where it lifts its tail, and if you attack it during that, it counters you. This time around, they seem they wanted to go all out. The first boss fight is a significantly harder challenge than the original game. So much so that there are many demo players who are actually dying to this fight the first time. Now that the combat is more open in the remake, they seem to want to take full advantage of what they can do with the boss fights. To take this boss on reasonably, you'll need to utilize proper dodging and counters, pay attention to in-game dialogue for tips, look at which attacks the enemy is doing to know how to deal with it, and also put to use the stagger system. Failing to do these will likely result in a loss or incredibly long fight. Speaking of enemy attacks, each attack the boss does is displayed in text above it before it launches the attack. Xenoblade players will be very used to this already, so for me I had no issue seeing what attacks were about to come out when I played the demo the first time. Don't try to go by animation, there is far less time to react. It's great they did this, since it also is a common RPG type theme to have enemies display their attack names before launching them. Don't feel bad if you don't figure out the boss that well the first time. It is a lot to take in fast and most still struggle, but playing the demo a second time or more shows how much more manageable it is. So that about wraps up the combat in the demo. As a whole, I'm incredibly impressed with what they are trying to accomplish in the remake with combat to make it more modernized but also keep it feeling like a JRPG so that it has original game elements. The amount of depth in the demo alone is impressive, and don't forget, we don't even have access to the materia system yet along with equipment changes. These things will further the depth, not to mention having a full 3-party team with managing all their ATBs properly will likely advance the combat even more. Once again, I believe Xenoblade players will feel at home playing this game, or any game that's similar to the Xenoblade series in combat depth. So as a whole, I'm incredibly excited to play the remake and see what they've done with the combat system to add more depth to all the bosses and even some regular fights, as well as what extra content is being added that's new to the remake to make it worth the $60 price. I enjoyed every minute of the demo, and although it took my Kingdom Hearts brain a while to stop pressing wrong buttons, I still had a great time. If you haven't tried the demo yet, I suggest giving it a try. Just remember, the game isn't trying to be like Kingdom Hearts, so if you've never played Final Fantasy before, you need to approach it with a different mindset. As always, thanks for watching.